Okay, so that was my 10-minute time limit. But I just wanted to make sure that I had time to kind of go over where this is going to take us over the next couple weeks since we won't meet in person and kind of what we have coming up and where we're going to apply this information. So before I get much farther, I wanted to just jump on to Blue Line and kind of point out a few things for the coming week, and then our week that we were planned to be off and what we're going to work on. So, as we talked about, we will come up with a plan B for presenting our toolkits. This is a really great article on building those windows and mirrors in your classroom. It's written somewhat from a perspective of how we can get better at preparing our pre-service teachers for making this a natural thing, for having them understand the windows and mirrors concept in their classroom before they ever even enter a classroom of their own. And fun sidebar, one of the authors was actually my practicum supervisor. And when I first came across this, I was like, oh, she was ahead of her time. We talked a little bit about this in my undergrad. And even with that being said, with the author of this great piece about building windows and mirrors in pre-service for pre-service teachers and also for those of us who are already in service, even that having that person in charge of my practicum, I still don't feel like I was prepared to go into the classroom and make sure that across my day, across my materials, across the literature I'm using, and the curriculum pieces, that I was prepared to ensure that windows and mirrors were available for all of my students. That's still a work in progress for me right now, 12 years in. So great read. I highly encourage you to read that one fully. There's no required response to it, but it just greatly exhibits how important that is for our students and what that concept should look like in practice. Next, so your actual assignment for this week was going to be discussion post number 3. So you can see there the title is Culturally Responsive Teaching. Within there, since we still do not have our books now to hand out since we're not meeting, there are 2 articles linked there for you to read, and then just some discussion questions to respond to for this week. And that one is due Sunday evening before next week, even though we're not meeting. Below that, you will see the first piece that goes into our next project. So down here at the bottom, you see Cultural Perspectives Project. That is our next bigger assignment. It's 50 points, so it's not one of the largest, but it does have several smaller components for you to start working on. So one part of it is this Culturally Responsive Pedagogy podcast. So if you have ever read anything from Cult of Pedagogy or listened to their podcast, they work really hard at kind of getting even veteran teachers kind of outside of the box. They kind of call people on things that maybe, for lack of a better term, just ruts that people get in. So this one is a podcast, and Zaretta Hammond is the guest on this particular episode, which is linked here. And she is someone who has done, she is someone who has done lots of work in the neuroscience field as it relates to culturally responsive teaching. So when you click on that, this is what it will look like. So here's the site for Cult of Pedagogy. And if you scroll to right here, this is where you can listen to the podcast. So about 4 minutes in is when the actual information starts. And towards the end, you'll hear her talk about her books and things, which is fine. But there's a meaty 30 minutes or so about culturally responsive teaching, how that relates to neuroscience, and kind of myths around culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching. So that is something that I want you to listen to before you begin working on these other items. And then, so this culturally responsive teaching matters is what I kind of clicked over to accidentally there. This is not technically part of the response or anything, but it's just a really nice sort of concise, you can see 6 pages there, but really 4 to 5 of really good information about the basics of culturally responsive teaching. So that's something that you can read to kind of help you craft your definition of culturally responsive teaching and how it relates to you and your position, whatever that may be in the classroom or not, because that is part of the project. And then reading your way to a culturally responsive classroom is the final piece. This is going to help you with the second part of the project. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up so you can see. So here it is, the first part, listen to the podcast. After listening, write a well-crafted response to the questions, what is culturally responsive teaching and what does it mean for you and your specific job? This second part here will relate to that reading your way to a culturally responsive classroom. So you're going to find literature that maybe represents a student or a group of students who typically aren't in your classroom. This is where I really want you to think about not perpetuating stereotypes and making sure we're selecting literature that we can use in a natural way in our classroom that reflects students that maybe aren't used to being to looking into mirrors in our things. That doesn't mean we read a book about Cinco de Mayo and plan a Cinco de Mayo celebration. We are not saying that that is all bad, but the point of this is to bring in literature and media that represents our students in a natural way so that it's not an anomaly, as we said. So it's not a holiday sort of thing, or it's not just holidays and festivals, that they recognize themselves in everyday parts of our classroom. And I think some of that reading and the podcast will really help kind of hammer that home. If you are stuck in finding a book, please let me know. But our world of children's literature is getting wider and wider, and authors are really making a point to create quality literature that represents a wide array of students. We Need Diverse Books is a Facebook page and a website. I believe it's sponsored by Scholastic, but they have kind of made it their mission to find authors that are writing stories from their own point of view that maybe represent groups of students or cultures that have been widely either misrepresented or underrepresented. So that's a place to look if you're just kind of fishing around. I want you to keep in mind too that this doesn't necessarily mean a student who is from a diverse cultural background, different from yours or from the majority of your students. This could be a student who is from a home that has two mothers, or this is a student who is dealing with some sort of physical or mental disability that just doesn't see someone like them represented in your materials. So I just want you to think about all the different ways, and I just really want to hammer home that point that it doesn't mean that we find a one story type of thing, a stereotype where we're just finding something where they're going to feel singled out. That's not the point. It's just implementing materials into our classroom that find ways to represent all of our students. So hopefully these next couple weeks will not only be a time of, work on these projects, but just a time of self-reflection and a time of maybe of mental growth for us. Every year when I go through this project with you and kind of think about that, every single year, I think of ways that I can make this happen in my classroom, and am I representing all the students that I have? And that probably looks different for many of you. Each of our classrooms are made up of very different populations of students, and all of them deserve sort of our mental attention to how they're being represented and how we're teaching so that they might be successful. So culturally responsive teaching is a very broad and deep topic that can take a lot of work. And what I'm asking you to do over these next couple of weeks is just to find a starting point. Even if you are reading this and thinking, my gosh, this is a huge undertaking, it absolutely is. But I'm just asking you to use this as a starting point and to just kind of to put some thought into it. So as always, let me know if you have any questions. Email me if you need me, and good luck.